So our wrap-up panel this morning is going to be moderated by Ericka Chickowski, who is with DarkReading, and probably everybody knows her name better than just about anybody in the industry because we see her byline so often. And David Challener from Johns Hopkins University is going to be on this panel. Needs no further introduction, I believe. And Dan Griffin from JWSecure, which is a consulting firm that he's created that specializes in TPM. And there's some guy, Sprague, on this, but he'll introduce himself. So no further ado, I'd like the panelists to come up and have a seat. What is our topic? Accessing enterprise data on mobile devices. So Ericka gets to kick it off.
Sounds good.
Very good.
Better grab my badge.
I'm going to warn you guys, I'm quoting for future reference. Maybe quoted, if you're clever. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about mobile security and basically the dangers, the opportunities. And the way I'd like to kick it off, actually we had an interesting discussion at breakfast, and I thought I'd start by talking to Dan and getting the responses from Dave and Stephen. Dan mentioned that he thought that mobile was a huge step back in terms of application security and other elements. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain what you mean by that, and I think that's a good way to start things off. Mobile, step backwards.
Yeah, mobile step backwards. I think mobile is a step backwards from a couple of perspectives. One is that as an integrator, you know, the first cut at the major platforms, iOS, I mean, if you're coming basically from any common realm of developer experience does not apply to iOS. So it's like, okay, great. And then you can't do what you want to do on the platform. But then as that changes and they start to meet the needs of application developers, security goes down. But they haven't planned for providing the kind of security features that you need to keep security up while still implementing the functionality you need. You know, PC's been working on that for 30 years. And look at Android, it's the same problem. Lots and lots of functionality, little security. Windows has actually found an interesting compromise in the middle, but still, I mean, it's clear where the direction is going. And I think finally, the carriers and the implementers of these operating systems are super nervous about providing system-level access. You can't do antivirus without system-level access. So I think we're just in this weird state right now where it's like, okay, well, all this fun stuff that we could do to make a PC really locked down, you just can't do that on a mobile device yet. So that's why I think it's a step backward.
Dave, do you agree, disagree? Kind of agree?
I guess I think it's worse than that. If you're an IT organization, today you've got PCs, you control the network, you put IDS in for work, you control entry to the network. You select what PCs you want, you select what hardware you want to be in those PCs, you want Opal drives, you get Opal drives in them. You control upgrade on the firmware, you select the OS, you select the apps, you can lock it down and say don't run anything with these apps. And now you take a look at the mobile devices. You don't control the network. You don't control the hardware. You can't select hardware subsystems that are in it. You don't get to control whether the firmware is updated. You don't get to select the OS. You've got other funny things running on the side, Trust Zone. You don't control any of that. And the app selection is done in an app store that you don't control. And boy, if I were an IT guy, I'd be panicking.
I could see Stephen kind of jittering in his seat. He wants to add something, so now's your chance.
So I think what's really funny is that what we should understand is why. So it's fundamental in the design and architecture and the intention of the device, and the problem is the word control. So you don't buy mobile control software, you buy mobile management software. It's important to understand, it's kind of, think of a hierarchy, you know, it's I'm the manager of X is very different than being the chief executive officer. Now, the good news is that the responsibility eventually stops with somebody who's in charge. But you really don't want to be the manager if then you have responsibility for being in charge. And the problem is the person in charge is completely incompetent. So Verizon has absolutely no interest in securing the US government's use of mobile devices. They don't, because they have a whole constituency from my children to the head of whatever in the US government. So they're in control. It's just that they're not aligned with the needs and requirements of the use of the device. And so we've bought all this mobile device management software, which is really a feel-good event. It's not anything other than that. And so what we need is control. There are some really, really good things that have come out of mobile, which is a device-centric view of the network is really, really useful. Because the enterprise has been trying to ignore the device because devices are complicated and messy, and have control in the network, and have hope and prayer in the device. So if you ask Verizon for a list of all their devices, they can give you one. You ask the NSA for a list of all their devices that are running inside the building on a highly secured network, they have no clue, right? It's just a prayer that somebody went around and counted them all, and we have the right number, but we don't actually know what they are. And so it's an interesting challenge, I think, as we look at the network out there, that a device-centric model is clearly where we want to go, but we also need control, not hope and prayer, and not management with somebody else in control. And so I think, in reality, yes, it's a step backwards, not because of the technology that's in the phone. I think if you were Verizon, and you had all the controls that Verizon has, you could actually build a really secure phone.
No, I think you're right.
And so the issue is not the technology. It's not like we have the wrong software, the wrong OS, Apple did the wrong decisions. There are lots of great things. They do boot integrity aspects. They check the validity of software. They have signed things. iTunes has control of an iPad. AT&T has control of an iPhone. Right? There is no control by AT&T of an iPad. The new carrier is iTunes. And so I think understanding the use of the word control in this context, and what we really want, and what we're really asking for, is the corporation has to stand up, put their foot down, and take back control. And unfortunately, nobody's actually willing to do that. I mean, it's easy to pick on US government because they're like a really big customer, and they should be able to do this. They should not deploy an Apple device on a federal system until Apple gives iTunes to the US government, period. And as long as they're willing to just say, let's transfer control of, a major corporation to iTunes, we're good. So just remember that iTunes is in charge of the availability of federal aviation. Because they can turn it off. If you put iPads as flight boxes in all of the airplanes, and trust me, if you're sitting on an airplane and the guy forgot his briefcase full of paperwork, we don't go anywhere, right? He's like, I gotta go back to the hotel and get my briefcase full of paperwork because we can't go anywhere. So, can Apple wipe an iPad? Yes. Can they wipe the 3,000 iPads that are in airplanes about to take off this morning? Yes. Will the airplanes take off without the iPads working? No. And so, good. So we've transferred availability of commercial aviation to Apple.
So, people need to put their foot down, but until they actually do that, we have to do security organization by organization, bunker by bunker. So, then the question becomes, what levels of control can people realistically, pragmatically deploy? And obviously, as you mentioned, people are starting to recognize the extreme limitations of mobile device management. So you're seeing things like containerization, mobile application management, NAC, and I'm just wondering let's start with NAC. We talked about this on the phone last week a little bit, and just discussing the network level security for these devices starting out, and then we'll discuss other things on device as well. So Dan, maybe you could start a little bit at your thoughts on, is that a good thing to do? Is it pie in the sky? What's your thought on that?
I think that NAC is dead.
Excuse me, are we taking questions here or should you only talk?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep this interactive, so if you have questions.
One comment is I really like the gentleman on the left from here, but isn't it the way that actually it's not black and white, so it's not all the control or no control at all? Because like in, I think, TPM Mobile, we have this different assets, like different stakeholder model, that the operator is having some assets in a mobile phone, the user is having some assets, and then the manufacturer is having some assets, and they all control their own assets, but not the entire platform. So how do you see this?
So I think it sounds almost like what we discussed a little bit about containerization almost, in terms of segregating different control areas on the device. So maybe let's start with that, because that's what...
I think shared control is an interesting thing, but in some ways, perhaps what would be best for us, the question is what's the picture of multiple participants in control, because it's not a monolithic control anymore. The whole context of BYOD and supply chain is multiple partners in control. And I think in some ways it's a great theme of a question that we should continuously answer throughout this panel, because it touches on every aspect. It touches on containerization, it touches on NAC. So, you know, if we were to address it in the context of NAC, if I don't know the identity and capabilities of the device that is attached to my network, then I have no ability to execute decision on policy as to what goes forward. And so the question is, are all devices going to have the same level of multi-party control within the device? Never. That day is gone. The one thing that's truly dead is the concept of the corporate gold master. Anybody who says we have a gold master should just stop, because the gold master can only be for one variant of platform for one moment in time. It's not to say I shouldn't buy 10,000 Samsung phones and have a configuration for those 10,000 Model X Samsung phones. It's perfectly appropriate. Just understand that those capabilities will be different than the 10,000 Windows PCs. And so what's important is when that phone shows up or that PC shows up, that the capabilities and identity, first the identity of the device. So do I know it's one of my Samsung phones or one of my PCs? And then the second is, well, which one? What capabilities does it have? Because yesterday we had somebody in a panel suggest that we should have a replaceable root of trust. And the reality is, maybe, maybe not. But the real question is the device that's connected one that has that 10-year-old root of trust or one that has the 2-year-old root of trust? And maybe I won't give everything to the thing that's 10 years old. You have to upgrade to the newer model because of some security reason or whatever.
I'd like to add that multi-tenant control is a really nice idea as long as there isn't one person that's the super user that's not me. If we can, let everybody veto a decision, that's maybe okay. But if one person, for example, controls the trust zone, they can see all the memory and do everything and trump all the other controls, then you don't really have multiple controls there. You have one person who's really in control, who's delegating some controls to other people. So you really need a design that either allows the person who's responsible for the security of the device to be that super user, or that actually has multiple vote where everybody can veto changes to the device.
And from a technology perspective, it's an interesting example because you talk about containerization. The capabilities on the device are essentially equivalent to what we have with the PC. You can containerize, and it's a software boundary. You have to be aware that you're relying on a software boundary. And what happens to software boundaries? They fail, so many months, and then they get patched. So, that's just the state of the art right now.
So the interesting thing is the concept of manufacturing versus operation. So when you think of ARM Trust Zone as an example, it's such a great example. What you need is someone who's in control of the manufacturing, the virtual manufacturing of a capability in the device. So think of it as if we were to call up one of the smart card manufacturers and say, make us some smart cards. So are they in control of your smart card deployment? No. Are they a critical supply chain component? Like if all of a sudden the smart cards are not available, then my system breaks because I don't have any more smart cards because their factory burned down. So if the virtual manufacturing facility, an entity like, a capability like TrustZone, were somehow compromised, it's the equivalent of burning down the smart card factory. Because I can't now create a new trusted application in the trust zone that I can trust because the factory burned down, i.e. it was hacked. And so I think there's a really interesting aspect of, does that put TrustZone in control? It's a little bit like an endorsement key in a TPM. Really important, but if the certificate authority for the endorsement keys gets compromised, then the quality of that endorsement key is not what it used to be, and I may have to take a different business process to remediate the weakness that was generated there. That doesn't mean that the CA for the endorsement key is now somehow in charge of my operations. I used it to manufacture my trust for other operations, but that manufactured trust is now controlled by me, even though I use the EK to facilitate the manufacturing of it. I think it's a good way to separate the two in how you approach these platforms. And I think it's true whether it's any trusted device. It's the difference between how do I build that trust and then how do I use that trust.
So the question then is it possible to trust a device, a BYOD device, and how can organizations handle that particular scenario, or should they?
Well, they have to. So it's best effort right now, I think. You can do device certificates, you can do user certificates. You have MDM solutions that I think are increasing in sophistication. I don't think there's any way around that right now. I mean, the cost model is, it really can't be ignored.
One of the most interesting curveballs that I see with controlling these devices is all of the privacy and legal risk implications that come with controlling a device owned by employees who have their own data on there that they don't want their employers to access. And that is the thing that I really would like to hear from all of you on how organizations can tiptoe around these issues.
There's no lawyer on the panel. I know.
Yeah, I know.
So I have a great real world example. So Wave builds a client-side DLP application and it locks ports down. But one of the things in order to lock ports down is it has to watch all your files. It's a great, if what you really want to know is every file that's on an endpoint, it's a great tool. So a customer said, what we want to do is run your DLP tool inside a virtualization on the client so that we can, in a BYOD environment, will require the employee to run our virtualization. Actually, it was contractors. We'll apply our contractors to run the virtualization so that we can have our own containerized operating system and do our stuff, and that the employee can't compromise that data. Excellent. So now they go and deploy the DLP. Well, of course, the container does absolutely nothing to prevent the DLP from scanning all the other files on the machine. And because it has a policy engine where you can say things like, go look for all the HIPAA files. Well, that's a nice policy. But how about go look for all the files that are competitors to mine? Well, that's spyware. So it was really an interesting context to discuss with them. Well, if you deploy that and you put it on a contractor's business machine, which might be shared with, so you're a consultant that does work with X, Y, and Z, the three biggest players in the industry. This is a great piece of information because you could actually look inside all the Word documents on this machine, look for specific keywords, and whenever it finds one of those keywords, it can do notice, copy, etc. of those, because that's what a normal DLP application can do. And so it was a fascinating occurrence of all they were trying to do is lock down the USB ports in their virtualization, but the byproduct was I can scan the whole thing. And so I think it's a really interesting challenge in this is that what we're missing is the information assurance executive for the consumer.
I should also add that the mobile work group at PCG is actually fighting with these things. They're trying very hard to solve this problem. That spec isn't released yet, though, as I recall. So I can't say too much about it. The gentleman who asked the question is working very hard on it.
I think that BYOD, you know, obviously depending on the nature of the organization and the needs of your employees, it could be as simple as, well, you know, people are checking their corporate email, or sophisticated thinking process about, well, okay, we have this, you know, spectrum of devices, so to speak, with different capabilities, you know, maybe from your lockdown PC all the way to your, again, your Wild West iPhone or whatever it is, you know. And you don't have to grant all those device types the same access.
But email is an evil thing. So what we need is a proxy on email that you run inside your company, because you're the only one who knows what devices are connected to your email. So if you had device identity and capabilities, and let's just pick 4 devices, your new Ford car with integrated email, and it gets on the console and you're dropping it off at the dealership. Okay? It has no security at all. Your iPhone, which is owned by you, your PC owned by the company, and your desktop machine. So let's just say the only one that has a data at rest solution is your desktop machine at the office.
Your iPhone is owned by you?
Yeah, well, okay.
It's owned by iTunes.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Owned by him, controlled by it.
Oh, owned by the and controlled by AT&T. So what I want is to send you an email file that is the healthcare records for all the employees because you work in HR. So you only want that attachment to show up on the machine that has the adequate data resolution to meet the state that you work in's minimum requirements for data rest. And so you have to ask each one of those devices, so before I send you that attachment, tell me what the capabilities of your device are. And so we need a filter on the email server that says, hello, you know, what device are you connecting with? And then what have you sent me? Because Dave doesn't know what device I'm going to use. He just sent me the email. Because I sent him a note saying, please send me all the HR records. He says, excellent. He sends it to me. And now all of a sudden the HR records are in my Ford at the dealership. Well, what's the Ford guy at the dealership going to do? Download them, right? And so now it's a huge problem, because if it creates a leak, then we have a huge issue. And then we were completely remiss. And so email is a really interesting thing, because email doesn't understand device identity and capabilities at all. And so the beginnings of, you know, Microsoft showed a little bit of stuff in an email proxy in their 2013 Outlook. We've dabbled in some product in that area. Others are dabbling in some product in that area. Has anybody deployed this stuff yet? Yeah. And so it's the responsibility of the organization that serves the mail out to look at that mail, understand the devices they're granting that mail to, and control at that point in time. I'm not going to give you the stuff unless you have a device that is adequate to handle the stuff.
I'd take it a step further. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you can encrypt, or in
allowed
your,
to be decrypted on devices you trust.
sure, but then you had to know to encrypt it to send it to me. You don't know I have a Ford car with email in it. You just sent me an email.
Yeah,
So
it should be encrypted by default.
I appreciate that, but that's a hard step. What my server can do is send an email to my Ford car that says, Dave sent you a file, but this device isn't capable of handling that file. So I got notice, because I really want the email in my car, so my wife says, stop on your way home and pick up X at the grocery store. You really want that email in your car. And your phone. Right? So anyway, I think somewhere in that picture there's an answer in that around how do we have much finer grained content control, understanding what the content is. Encryption helps solve it.
Yeah, that's a whole other beast, is why all our email isn't encrypted by now. I mean, I don't understand that. It seems like it all ought to be encrypted by default. But
You're opening a whole nother can of wax there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
May
got
I
a question over here.
comment this? it has been said some description of the BYOD is actually that you don't have a control. It's a consumer's own device. And once you have a device which is entirely in your control, that's not anymore BYOD. It's actually corporate device. And it's not one far end and other end, but it's kind of gradually grows to either direction. And it's based on the capabilities the device is having. So once it's like a dummy iPhone, it doesn't have anything to support your corporate needs. It's the far end, and then other end is full of services. And it's actually served based on the capabilities inside the device. If it's having TPM, is it having encryption? If it's having a flash player or something, it's getting different services than it's just having email client on a web browser.
So the good news is that Pizza Hut solved this problem. And so Pizza Hut, many years ago, where you could pick on Domino's is probably a better example than Pizza Hut. Domino's solved this problem. If you want in college to take a job and deliver pizzas, do they give you the Domino's fleet vehicle? No, you get to take your Pinto down there. They give you a magnetic thing. They stick it on the roof, and you are now a shiny Domino's driver, and they give you a little hat. Excellent. However, it turns out that you can't drive for Domino's if you don't have insurance. And so what you have to do is, before you can become a Domino's, driver with your new spanking used Pinto, you have to produce a certificate of insurance that proves you paid for insurance on your car, or they won't let you deliver one pizza. And so in BYOD, the one example that I'm very familiar with is a cloud service model for a self-encrypting drive is the only way today to do provable data at rest on a user administratively controlled machine. Because what you're able to do is you have an independent trust isolation container in the Opal drive that assures that when it's managed by System A, that only System A can alter the drive. And so as a consumer, I can turn on my machine, I can, with full administrative control, I can put any OS I want on it, I can connect it to the cloud service, I can transfer management control of this isolation container in the Opal drive to a cloud service that I'm the admin for. I can say, lock the drive. And what I have is an independent, authoritative, auditable record that's held by that management server, which is asserting that I have a data at rest solution at that moment in time in my machine. And so now I'm able to go to Blue Cross Blue Shield, a company I'm working for as a contractor, and assert to them a capability in my device that is properly assured by properly configured trust based on industry standards that knows and meets minimum requirements. And so now it's an example we should copy of how to do a proven capability in a device correctly. And if I supplement that with a TPM in the device so that every time Blue Cross Blue Shield connects, it could, in theory, through their NAC infrastructure or an application level, ask the web service, hey, is this machine still properly configured and controlled, and does it have the right drive in it?
So here's the other curveball, is that particularly with younger workers, email is not even relevant anymore. That all of the models of how they connect to and manipulate data is totally different. So the thing that is the crux of the matter is controlling the applications and how the applications interact with that data. And to me, what I see as a problem there is that those applications may circumvent that entire cloud drive. So I'm just curious how you see, people dealing with that application problem, especially really permissive applications that are storing data on, actually on the physical drive, and then another application's got tons of permissions, can access that data. It becomes a mess.
I think one of the things I liked about this panel was we talked about mobile, we didn't say cell phone. And as a result, we have one class of devices that still can be treated sort of like PCs, these tablets. At least there's some tablets out there, like the Windows tablets, that you can still treat like a PC, and you can still get all those protections that you normally have. And the real question is the cell phone model going to migrate down into the tablets, or is the tablet model going to migrate up into the cell phones? And if we've got that tablet model where it looks kind of like a PC, you can treat it kind of like a PC, you can control the network and all those things, then it doesn't matter if you're using Twitter or using email, as long as you control the network, control the apps, control the OS, control the firmware, you've got a reasonable chance that you're going to be able to keep the thing secure. If you're going to be in a region where you've got a phone like this one here on my hip that I don't control any of that stuff, I don't think it almost matters. You're just dead.
There has to be a stated corporate policy about what people should and should not be doing with sensitive data. We'll stop. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody texts a reporter,
Exactly. Yeah, well, that's the exact thing, as I'm
a
thinking.
secret,
We're
and it
talking,
comes out.
yeah, we're talking email,
You
but,
know,
It doesn't help.
you
there's
know,
disciplinary
we've got
action.
text.
We've
you
got
know?
20 years of
Yeah.
experience saying we can't fix the user.
So-
We've
so
been
the-
trying this blame and train game,
Right.
where we blame the user when they do something stupid, and then we try to train them not to do stupid things. You can't fix stupid.
But nor can you use technology to fix stupid, and so
You can
don't
help.
try to do the one but not the other.
But
Right?
you can certainly help. You can not have applications that have all sorts of additional functionality in them that are almost never used by the end user, but which can certainly be used by attackers. So there are things you can do with technology to fix this problem. Stanford had this neat idea 15 years ago, where when you typed in a password, what got sent was not the password, but it was a hash of your password together with the root of the server you were going to. And as a result, if somebody changed a letter and used a character that looks like an A but isn't an A, to try to fool you and to go into the wrong site, and you type in your password, what got there was not your password, it was a different password, because when they hash that root, it's different. If we spend enough time on technology to try and fix the environment so users aren't so easily led to do stupid things. I mean, you give somebody a candy bar for their passwords and they do it, you're dead. But if you're using this technology from Stanford, if they give you a password, it may not matter. There may be that there's also assault somewhere that's being used, and what they type in isn't something that you can type in.
So I've got a hypothetical scenario, and maybe you guys can talk about it. You have a stated corporate policy. You say, okay, you can only use mission. And say, in an ideal world, they're not using the model that Stephen laid out, and they do put the corporate data in that X, Y, and Z application. That data gets stored on the device. They download some malware version of Angry Birds on their phone that has pretty much access to every capability of the phone. GPS, all the storage, passwords, everything. It's that application that people should be worried about, because that application can circumvent a lot of protections and actually access that data that is used by the other applications elsewhere. And they're not actually breaking corporate policy, unless you say, please do not download Angry Birds.
But did we tell the shareholders? I mean, the problem is every year I have to sign off on this 10K and I'm not brave enough, okay? So first off, my shareholders should all yell at me because I'm not brave enough. But, so here's the thing that KPMG should force me to write in my 10K. Due to the vanity of the chief executive officer of the company and the desire to carry the latest and greatest sexy mobile device in a vain attempt to look cool, the intellectual property that may be sent to the CEO could be easily taken, compromised, and this might result in the significant reduction in shareholder value due to active IP theft by nation states, competitors, partners, and whomever else, right? Exactly, right? So if we started to get like the CEO of IBM to sign that in their 10K, that'd be good. By the way, if they have a breach, now here's an interesting question, because if you have a breach, the CEO of IBM loses their iPhone. Did they know? Like, had anybody like made them aware that maybe this wasn't the brightest idea? Oh, so now you had a conscious awareness that the device was compromised, or could be compromised, and so now it's a material deficiency because it was malicious intent as opposed to just ignorance. And so this is the problem. We actually have all the rules and laws and policies to govern all this. We probably need a few class action lawsuits to just go out there and see if we can collect money from the insurance companies, because it would be really easy to do. But in essence, you could argue every corporation in the United States of America just lied on their 10K. And so that's an interesting challenge, because they said, no, I want my iThing device on the network, and all the controls went poof. And so it's time to begin putting the toys back so that we have control. And by the way, the consumer privacy for your 10-year-old on Facebook is exactly the same problem as Snowden. It's exactly the same problem. The children were taking the files and putting them in the wrong spot. And, so it's education, but it is technical, and we need to have built-in security, because it turns out that if you ask for an aftermarket airbag, a very small percentage of people buy them. If you build them in, we all use them. If you hit somebody hard enough at the front of your modern car, the airbag goes off most of the time. But if you gave us the option to buy the airbag, it was surprising. It was less than 50%.
I want to say from working in private industry with the end users and all their shinies that they want to bring in, and looking at the candy bar effect, or the candy bar phenomenon of what can give up your passwords, there's been, over the past however many years, various surveys that have come out where a vast majority, anywhere from 75 to upwards of 90% of people who deal with sensitive information or remote access or even any kind of access, they don't believe that the onus for security falls on them. They believe that it's somebody else's responsibility to protect them and their data. So we almost have to rely on the technology to a large degree, because education is only part of it. But
we've got a very long experience that shows that training people is not effective. And this quote that everybody says, doing the same things twice, expecting a different result is a sign of insanity. We say that people who do that don't use modern PCs, because I don't know how many times you've done the same thing twice and have gotten a different result. But
you have to reboot 3 times.
There's a great example.
But the point is that we do know that merely doing extra training of people and telling them, no, you cannot download PDFs that look like you need to open them to do your job, is not going to be really effective.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate on that and just say I've written a lot of stories and talked to a lot of people in the training world. And it may not be that just merely doing training isn't effective, it's just that we're doing the training wrong right now. And that there are effective methods of training, but putting them in a room with a very boring lecture and once a year, yes, that's ineffective. It's a matter of doing it creatively.
Speaking of building into the technology, there has not been a conversation about NIST, and I hate bringing NIST up because, well, I just didn't think it's that.
Keep going. Don't go there.
Security.
The point is that NIST, Andy Redenshot has been working on this hardware-related mobile devices guidance. And the first version came out a while back, and we are awaiting the next draft. that draft came out, the initial draft came out, some in the telecommunications industry did not like the idea of a hardware interest.
Sure. Transfers control.
Exactly.
The only person in the world who actually has to do this is the US government. They're the only people who are actually capable of securing the United States of America, and I would argue the rest of the world, in this infrastructure, and they are lax in their execution of the job. The number one person who's holding back IA by far has been the the certification process or the guidance process in using this. We obviously had a huge step forward in Deborah Plunkett's statement at this conference on Monday evening. It was a huge step forward, and we should commend that and celebrate it every step we can. But the only person who can actually wrestle control back from Verizon is a requirement placed on the environment by somebody who's strong enough to do that. The only player, emphasis on the word only player, is the U.S. federal space.
No, and Stephen, I do not be surprised that's pretty much the sole point of that.
I have a question. Do we have a Secretary of Commerce currently? We do? Okay. Good. Because it seems like there are long periods of time when we don't actually have one, and it makes it very hard for things to progress.
But I just want you, first of all, does anyone have any visibility, and again, I'm using this to not using disabilities, those two are conflicting. But does anyone have any visibility as to when that guideline is going to be released? Because that's very important. And the second thing is, do you have any visibility into whether it's going to be watered down because of telecommunications? Complaints about the hardware transfer? It seems to be a rather important topic.
You want to comment?
Well, I can say on the first part as soon as it's ready. I surely nobody in government gets any excitement out of holding anything longer than they're told to. On the second point,
So let's explain why, just so that everybody understands. So today, if you're a corporation, the concept that the children would have is that I don't need a phone on my desk. Just give me a cell phone, I'm good. Right? Make sure I got signal in the building. Give me a little, cell that extends this Verizon cell into the building, and we're good. Now, the carriers like that because they get an opportunity to do a landline drop, i.e. a cellular account, for every single employee in the company. So in the old days, we used to have these like phone switch things and like phones and VoIP phones and stuff like that in the office, because it turns out that if you look and buy one of those systems, you can buy like a 648 system, right? 48 extension phones, 6 lines. Remember those days? So that's interesting. So you mean I only needed 6 accounts for the carrier for 48 people inside the company, because it turns out everybody in the company keeps talking to each other. I mean, we really want them to sell stuff to the outside world as opposed to just talk to each other, but no, they're just talking to each other. So we only need 6 outgoing lines. Today, the model that the kids are propagating is, no, we should have 48 outgoing lines. Now, the other problem with that is, can I tap Verizon? Sure. You want to listen to all the phone calls. We have all these great wiretap laws, and you can go tap Verizon. Are we tapping General Motors phone switches internally? Oh my God, no. Who wants to listen to General Motors talk to General Motors, right? So I'm sure there's some place in the world where they've inserted a listening device into the actual switch inside the company. But nobody's running around the company tapping the wires. They really only care about the conversation going out of the company. So cool. So what we need is a phone switch without wires. Oh, so that's called voice over IP. And so what you really want is a cell phone in Australia for General Motors, when it makes a phone call, to have a phone number in Detroit. Because it just makes the phone call over the voice over IP over data services. By the way, if we put really strong crypto in that handset to that device there, could we like make really good crypto over that public shared network that everybody's listening to? Sure. And you'd have private communications by just doing the basic plumbing you need to do, which is you turn on the device, it gets transport, you encrypt the transport. What's interesting is not so much the voice communication. All the metadata goes away. So now the Australian government can't see who General Motors is meeting with. Or let's not pick on Australia, let's put the guy in China. Oh, so if you're making phone calls in China and having a meeting and you're running around being a senior GM executive and you're using your mobile phone, do you think they're tracking who you're having meetings with? Sure, it's easy to do. So what you want is an ability to have a completely secured comms environment where all they know is that there is a device with bandwidth, not who are you calling. Because there's no metadata traffic on it at all. You don't have any of the call details, no routing details, no nothing. It's just transport. So we know how to build these things. We know what the parts are. It's time to get on with removing the sign that's on the way out of the MITRE building that says, no encrypted laptop, your hand in the punch press. Anybody who's watched How Things Work, go watch that, because it actually turns out in the security world, the OSHA guys are awesome. So when you watch on How It Works and they're going to punch plate a new Ford, hood, they take the big sheet of steel, the guy guides it into the machine, and you know what there are? Handcuffs on him. In order to activate the machine, he has to put his hands like this. There are no signs. There doesn't have to be a sign that says, do not put your hand in the machine, because that didn't work. Right? There's a whole bunch of guys running around that have one hand because they were holding the thing, pushing the button. The greatest activation system ever invented in manufacturing was the 2-button punch press. You go like this, and the 500-ton machine goes, and you don't lose your arms. And I don't need a lot of training. I just need a little bit of certification and test, because if the line manager walks around the plant and one of the buttons is duct taped up, because the Air Force guy was yesterday was great. You can do everything with duct tape, right? So you duct tape up one button, then you stick your hand in, then you punch the other button. You deserve to lose your other hand in that environment, right? And people do that, and that's why we should have inspectors and plant supervision and rules that say when you're doing that process, go look at how meat packing plants work. They're all wearing gloves, they've got controls, all the parts are there. We've protected the employees from themselves. We don't just let them run around with sharp knives, they'll cut their fingers off.
Anybody else have any questions after that?
This to meat packing.
Analogy?
I mean, we've lost.
Comment or question? He's talking standards.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's good. I like it. I want to get back to this hardware rooted mobile device guideline that just is hanging out there. We haven't seen it since the first draft. I recall that most everyone in the TCG was just extremely happy when the first draft came out, and it seemed like a good direction. Just for those, and for maybe the one or two people here who don't understand why that matters, having a hardware root of trust, standardized. Well, I would prefer a standards-based hardware root of trust. I want the word standards-based added to every damn time you say the word hardware root of trust. I even told that to the NIST folks, and one of them told me, I don't know what you mean by that. But anyway, I'm curious. Will someone just say why this matters, having a hardware root of trust in a mobile device? We know why it matters in all other environments. I know why here, but I want, for the two people here who don't know this, I want that answer.
Because it's a proprietary hardware root of trust. Let's just pick a company. Google generates their own hardware root of trust in the device. That's called iTunes. You know what the experience is. So it's transferring control from AT&T to iTunes. So we've watched the demo of this. The demo was AT&T was a carrier. They control the phone with absolute power. They can shut it off at will. They can terminate service, and they can change the OS. Let's define the word take control of the device as the guy who can change the OS. So if I can take your iOS device and run Android on it because I'm in control, then I'm in control. And by the way, if I do that, does your MDM work the next day? No. Right? So the brilliant maneuver by Apple was to take control of the initial hardware root of identity of the subscriber, and in the transition from iPhone to iPad, the consumer experience used to be, you go to the AT&T store, you buy a phone, you then take it home, and if you wish, you connect it to iTunes. There were lots of good reasons why, but it worked as a phone without using iTunes. With iPad, you must register your iPad on Christmas morning with iTunes, And then you get to choose your transport carrier. By the way, do you have to have one? No, you can just use Wi-Fi. Can you buy just 30 days? Yes, so we as consumers think this is brilliant because we're no longer bound by this enormously annoying AT&T Ma Bell company. You know, mom's watching me all the time, right? But because the hardware root of trust is controlled by Apple on a proprietary basis, which is perfectly fine. They made the product, we bought it. They have global monopolistic control, and they get to decide whether iPads are available for use tomorrow morning in Germany. They can shut the country off. And so we have decided, that's cool because it's a US company. We can shut Germany off. By the way, it'd be a little bit less cool if it was a German-owned company and they could shut us off, right? So the reason why a standards-based, independent hardware root of trust as part of the NIST mobile guidelines are absolute in that this is what allows someone else to take control of the device before the carrier. And if you look at almost every use case and application out there, this is the fundamental capability that's being requested. It's being requested in a language that's not as clear as that. And if you were to look at the marketplace, the reason why the big companies are pushing against it saying it should be a trusted platform module root of trust is not because of a technical capability of the TPM, but because the control capabilities of the TPM have been properly architected with good security principles to assure that there's not monolithic ownership of the hardware root of trust in a TPM. And so if I can just shade the edge and say, oh, no, you shouldn't use TPM as a standard in a NIST document because that would be like saying Ethernet. Oh, yeah, okay. Because we can't talk about technology. Yeah, okay, that's also sort of a silly concept. But how do I get to a point where I have a common mechanism standard? I don't care if it says TPM. It should copy the fundamental principles of the trusted computing architecture for an independently controlled root of trust with an EK and AIKs and privacy built in and whatever. And if NIST wants to rewrite the entire trusted computing specification into that document, they can, and probably even should, so that it's technology concept agnostic. But the question is, what are the fundamental principles of trusted computing that could be reflected in that document for which the trusted computing specification then has now addressed the 1,431 detailed variants that have been being fought over at trusted computing meetings for the last decade. And the principles are easy.
Stephen, I really appreciate the answer. It's good. The last time I will repeat. I appreciate that answer, Stephen. That was a great answer, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I hope that a couple of people that I was speaking of are grasping that. The thing that I just want one final comment, and that is that NIST is fond of saying, as many people in government are fond of saying, we don't pick winners. That's their mantra. We don't pick the winners. And that's their way of saying we don't pick a specific technology, we don't want to favor one vendor over another. I appreciate that stance. I will say that I wish NIST could just back up a little bit and say, we may not pick winners, but we sure know how to identify fundamental principles that we can get behind. And and that to me would be the best development. And thanks.
Yeah, and TCG is not a winner or loser conversation. It is a principles conversation. And if there's a principle that's missing within the trusted computing architecture, then let's address it. And actually, what's interesting is the principles that allow that independent trust control are exactly some of the principles that prevent NIST FIPS 140-2 level 3 certification on TPM. And so we're in a full up contrast, because what you want is the device to be assumed to be an alternate credential holder within a device, or a derived credential in FIPS 201. We absolutely want that. There should be clean clarity out of the US government that that is a goal in mobile, because that's how we don't have to have a dongle to unlock our phone. And in order to do that, there are contrasts in the control of the multi-party trust that the TCG working group specifications for the device and the mobile device, et cetera, have had to put in place to meet the privacy and limited control capabilities, which is exactly the principles you want in monopoly control. And those are in full contrast. And the only people that can address that is the raw work, and I'm sorry, after 8 years, it's not been done. And so we either need to shoot them or increase their budget. The problem is NIST is underfunded. It should, the funding in NIST should be 10x'd, or we should shoot them. But where it is right now is an untenable situation because there's not enough execution capacity and capability to address all the things that need to be done, and the pace of technology is too fast, and we're the poster child for it. $4 billion of industry spend, no deployment, and it's what's standard. It's one of the core things in the way.
I have to say that
10x, I'm on the plan.
I have to say that I agree with half of that. I wouldn't agree with shooting them, but I absolutely do believe they need to have their budget increased.
Slow rolling the thing is doing us more damage.
Well,
you have to either do one or the other. You can't continue the slow roll process. It's hurting the fundamental competitiveness of our economy and the U.S. marketplace. Number one thing you can do, because this is the foundation for the economic model for cloud. And trust me, that it is actually important to have all the keys held in the hands of companies that are within our economy. Put an American hat on, but others want others. So, let's go play.
If you shoot them, you have to replace them with somebody else. And you have to give that somebody else the 10x budget. So you might as well just give them the 10x.
Give them the 10x budget. We're all in favor of increasing this budget.
I'll say aye.
I love this guy.
You didn't think this was going to be the end result, did you?
Yeah, it was going in a very dangerous direction for a while. Then we got to 10x, and it's all good.
I've got the recording if you want to take
Absolutely.
Sure, we can find the justification.
Do we have any final questions for the panelists? Sure.
Yeah, I guess as a final comment I would make is that we know how to do this stuff. I think we have to make sure that we start putting on our glasses and calling it out when the emperor has no clothes. And for good or for bad, as somebody who's been in this space in a single company for 20-something years now, I will always tell you where my vulnerabilities are, what we can do, what we can't do, and there are times where it's not beneficial to our organization. Anybody who's hung out with me knows that one of my favorite conversations is not how do I secure you with the technology that I provide you, but how do I weaponize it and kill you with the technology that I provide you. And you have to look at both sides of that. And weaponization of some of the security controls is really kind of abilities that you have in the technologies and capabilities, because these are control tools. And control left as an open, claimable switch is a really dangerous thing. And I think that's one of the aspects of right now, we're lost in a conversation of mobile versus PC or phones versus tablets or whatever. It's not that. It is a discussion of how are we going to manage multiple tenant trusted devices? What are the basic foundation principles for that? And then you got to stick to your guns. And I don't care that you have the slickest marketing program under the sun. We have to continue calling out people who the emperor has no clothes. And we have, at the end of the day, we can't just leave that job to the lawyers. Maybe we have to, because they're the only ones. We have to put better product liability into this environment. And what prevents that product liability exposure is standards and certification. If I have liability and I choose to go it my own way, and then my own way doesn't work out and I make a huge mess, I'm not protected by, I used the standard system. I met the government crash worthiness test with my car. I passed all the tests and I killed the person because they were in a car. They hit a barrier and some piece of the dashboard, ran through the person and he died. The reason that we don't have enormous product liability problem in every one of those is because we've created a crash test infrastructure that says, hey, they tested it, they whacked into the thing, it was an accident, stuff happens, the guy died. And so, could you have done a better design? Perhaps. Was there a memo internally that said this dashboard piece could break off and kill you and it's a bad idea? Yes. And the question is, you know, how far those things become, how do I attribute it, and when do I issue a recall, and how do I fix it, and how do I learn from it and do better the next time? And I think we're just not very good at that in this brand new, very young industry called cyber. And we should take lessons from OSHA, we should take lessons from EPA. The EPA guys are so much better at this than NIST, by like orders of magnitude. Right? I mean, they've cleaned up the air, they've cleaned up the water. We can argue the regulatory environment people agree and disagree with, but they've made tremendous steps in leveraging that and holding people's feet to the fire. And I think that's one of the challenges. And it's, you know, if getting somebody to stand up and say, we pollute the river, and every day you got to say, we pollute the river, eventually you'll actually stop polluting the river.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. With this, I think we hand the baton to Richard.